I'm having a great week. I'm enjoying myself. I'm having a brilliant time.
Oh, yeah. You going to go out and party down at number 10?
Well, it's the only place to have one by the looks of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like him, but I feel sorry for his liver.
I know. I'm actually waiting for the budding entrepreneur of Blackpool to open the number 10 club.
Yeah. Yeah, that would work, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And with the black door as your entrance and all that kind of stuff, it would be waiting for it. It's bound to happen.
Yeah, a couple of people dressed up, the bouncers dressed up as policemen. Yeah.
And you're allowed to tell them to fuck off as you're walking through. You know, there's cleaners in there that you can abuse and all that kind of stuff. So
that's most Blackpool pubs, if we're being honest, though, isn't it?
No, but I'm having a good week. I've had a very good week at work as well, and it's been a delight. I mean, it's nice to have something to smile about because I've had a good week in my studies, and I've had a good week in my workplace with some of my students doing very well in their studies that I've helped out. And so it's all really good. And it's really nice having something to smile at with all these terrible things going on at the moment in terms of, you know, pinching of the whole wallets and people struggling to pay for things. So, you know, it's a little light relief that isn't celebrating money, because I'm getting a bit fed up of people celebrating business and money at the minute, because I think it's a bit distasteful with so many people struggling.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And on the subject of celebrating things, what did we think to our story this week?
Well, let me do the synopsis, shall we? Let me do the synopsis, and then we're going to go into this, because I can see what you've written on the screen, and I have no idea what your thinking is, because you play those kind of games with me. Sure.
I love what you've put on the screen, and yeah, that one is just yeah.
Right. So basically, we read The Cyrstal Egg by H.G. Wells, and we'll go a little bit more into the publication of it. The story is a guy, Mr. Pace, I think his name was. Case, Mr. Caves. Caves.
Caves.
Yeah. God, I'll tell you what, I was only reading it this afternoon as well, and I can't remember the names. You know. But anyway, Mr. Cave owns this bric-a-brac shop in Seven Dials in Camden in London. And he has a curious thing in his window of a crystal egg. And some vicar comes in to buy it. And he says £5, which back then is about the equivalent of number 10 Downing Street drinks bill. So he then says, well, that's a bit expensive. I'm not buying it for that. And he says, no, it's £5. And then his wife has a go at him saying, why don't you sell it for less, because this guy wants to buy it? He says, I know my business, it's £5. To and froing, and basically the priest walks off, and then Mr. Cave gets some grief off his wife and his stepchildren for not selling an egg that effectively is worth 10 guineas, which to people that don't know old money is 2.5 pence or something like that. And so and they give him grief over it, and then the egg goes missing when he's out delivering something. And that's kind of the setup. And you've got the wife going, she's already spent the £5 that the guy's probably going to pay, and she's now annoyed that this thing doesn't exist there anymore. Then it turns out that Mr. Cave has taken the egg to a friend of his, because there's a friend of his that he kind of knew who was a scientist. And he took it because he'd started noticing something in the egg. He started noticing the way of light going in and the light actually being in the egg. And then through the process of the scientific method, they start looking into it, and they suddenly realize that they could see more. They could see a whole landscape within this egg, and then these other creatures, and then the creatures were looking back at them, and they suddenly realized that they were looking onto an alien landscape, and the alien landscape were looking back. That there was this two-way portal that they could see each other, and they deduced that it was Mars that they were looking at. And these experiments then go on, and more stuff is discussed into where or not how this thing can possibly work. And then Mr. Cave takes the egg back, and then his scientist friend doesn't hear from him for a while, goes round to see him and finds him dead in the shop. He's just died of a heart attack. And in that time, the egg has then gone missing again, and the egg's then being sold as part of a lot when they were selling off all the bits and pieces. And then he goes searching for the egg, and we're left with this kind of this ad nauseum search of looking for this crystal egg, which is a portal through to viewing Mars, and whether there are more of these portals that can view and what they actually mean. And it's left in that whole kind of bit of a mystery. Is that the same story that you read, Ash?
That's exactly the same one, word for word.
It's not as good at words. Okay, I'm going to ask the question. Ash, what did you think of it?
I thought it was a steaming pile of turgid dog shite.
Really?
Really. I
Right.
thought it was overwritten. I thought it was pointless. I thought the characters were ill thought and ill conceived. I thought when he started writing about science, he was boring the tits off me. When it actually got to, I mean, parts of the science, it was, oh, right, we're going to sort of like, the light's refracting. We need 137 degrees before we can actually look inside this. And then, oh, and by the way, we're looking at Mars. No explanation as to how we know that it's Mars, just it's Mars. And yeah, it was just shite. It starts off with this group of people who you despise. You despise the little shopkeeper because he's just a prick. You despise his wife, not just because she's fat, but also she's a prick. You hate the stepchildren because they're greedy, grasping little bastards. The vicar and the foreigner who turn up to try and buy the egg. You don't like them because they're trying to part this man from his egg. The foreigner even admits at the end, oh, I was only trying to buy it because he didn't want to sell it. Well, that's really fucking nice, isn't it? Well, that's a dick move and a half. So, yeah, I didn't like any of the characters. The whole notion that they were looking at something didn't even seem scary. You know, oh, I'm looking at something that's on a different planet. So what? Yeah, it's not like they can touch it. It's not like you can touch them. So, yeah, there was no tension or anything like that. The whole idea that this is Mars, it was slightly explained because they said they could see constellations of stars and they were ending up looking at that brightest star that was Earth. And you just think, you imperialist twat, you know, that brightest star that is Earth, fuck off. Yeah, it just irritated me.
Well, that's fair enough because I bloody loved it.
Really?
Yeah, I absolutely adored it. And I got a feeling that there may be a reason for this. I loved it. I actually loved the writing. I loved the words that he used. I didn't think it was overwritten at all. I found myself doing lots of comparisons actually whilst doing it in modern literature, which I found quite interesting. Well, actually, I found the way it's not a direct ripoff by any means, but the actual tone that it was written in is very, very similar to the voice of the book in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
All right.
And so it kind of had that almost like, it felt like it was part of the influence behind it. And it kind of behind Hitchhikers was coming from this. And it was very H.G. Wells, because I mean, one of my favorite books of all time is War of the Worlds, which I'm going to come back to in a second.
Yeah.
Because I loved the whole 137 degrees. I loved the science bit of it because it wasn't overdone, but it was also not underdone. It was written by someone that you could tell actually had a bit of an understanding of it, rather than someone who had no understanding of it and just made it up. A bit like when we read The Horror of the Heights, you know, Arthur Conan Doyle, where it was so obvious it was written by someone who didn't understand the science behind all of that. Where this, I thought, was actually written from a point of there was a knowledge behind it. I didn't find it scary. I didn't think it was a horror story, but it was definitely a science fiction story and definitely a weird tale. I didn't hate the shopkeeper once I found out more what he was doing. I got his fascination with it. I liked the fact that he was addicted to this thing and that he was in this, he got himself into this marriage with these hideous people, much in a kind of Cinderella fashion. And I enjoyed the way it came across in that way. And like I say, in the language of it really got me. But also, as I was listening to it, I became fascinated as to where it actually stood regarding War of the Worlds. So I looked up when the publication of everything was, and it was actually published the same year as War of the Worlds was published as a serial.
Right.
In the Strand magazine. And there are descriptions that are almost similar between the two. There's a description of the red weed that appears in War of the Worlds, and it almost becomes the way that the Martians scrutinize this planet like bacteria in a drops of water. That this crystal is the Martians' way of observing what's going on here before they decide to invade. And with that part of the knowledge behind it, or that idea, because it's never been stated that that's what it is. But with that idea, I suddenly really bought into this as being like a prequel to War of the Worlds that he'd written and just kind of put out there without much fuss. And it really did trigger to me. I really enjoyed that as an idea. So I liked it a lot for that.
Yeah, I did think with sort of like you mentioned in Mars, I wondered if there was a War of the Worlds connection there. And my research had shown that I hadn't realised War of the Worlds had been serialised, because I know this story appeared in Pearson's in 1897, and I thought War of the Worlds was published in 1898, but that was the hardback.
That was the hardback, yeah. It came out in serial form in 1897.
So yeah, the notion that it's a prequel or it's a teaser book or it's yeah, I can understand why there's the appeal there. But didn't you think the scientific writing, I mean, obviously the scientific writing worked for you, he sort of like touched a scientific nerve with you. For me, it just seemed a little bit tortured and I'm going to say overwritten again. I mean, I get what you're saying about Douglas Adams stuff, but the thing with Douglas Adams is it was never his writing style, it was always his humour. His writing style, sometimes there are too many collected and complex clauses within a piece. So I'm there thinking, I've got to go back to the start of this sentence to work out what the fuck's happening. Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you that. I mean, the science in it is like I say, it's using very, very scientific words, and that's not always the best thing to do, because you're not always appealing to people that genuinely know that. But you can argue that point with a lot of different things with wordage, can't you? You can like what does he call it? I can't remember. He uses a French term, which actually en rapport, yeah, which means to come together and knit together, yes. which is very interesting. This is one of the things I like about H.G. Wells is you can go backwards on things. You can look at it and then go, was he predicting or was it just something that we can see backwards? But it so aligns itself with things that we know about, like quantum entanglement and the idea of this.
We know about quantum entanglement.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm talking about the general scientific community. I mean, I do not have an in-depth knowledge of quantum entanglement, but I know the basic principle of quantum entanglement. And crystals are something that was kind of experimented with, and they kind of prove crystal harmonics as well. And it kind of deals with those elements in a very sort of scientific way. However, I do accept that if you're not into, I mean, because you're not the biggest hard sci-fi fan in the world, are you?
No, I'm not. I mean, The Martian, read The Martian, enjoyed The Martian, and it was interesting how you can turn poo into potatoes or something like that. Maybe I skipped some of the pages, actually, now that I think about it. But yeah, too much science, it's just off-putting. I like characters and story, and
yeah. And granted, this isn't that. This is the egg is the star of this story. The crystal is the star of this story, without a doubt.
So you're going with the notion then that this was written as potentially something that can be perceived as a prequel to War of the Worlds?
Yes. I really like the idea that kind of aligns. It doesn't align absolutely perfectly, but a lot of the descriptions of the Martian creatures, particularly the ones without the wings, kind of lines up. And then also when you look at the idea of the ones that are come to Earth have a different effect of gravity on their bodies, which would affect the way that they kind of look and move compared to it there. But it was the red weed. He describes the red weed in this one, and that is identical to the red weed that takes over Earth in the War of the Worlds. And so it to me, I think they are very similar, and I think they come from the same universe in that respect. So I think it is a prequel. I think it is the Martians studying this planet. These crystals are that way of doing that.
I think it's one of those stories which it's better to have discovered that after War of the Worlds, because I sincerely believe an awful lot of people who enjoy War of the Worlds, if they'd read that prequel first, would think, do you know what? Not asked about the actual main story. Yeah, I've read this one. Yeah. Oh, there's some eggs.
Yeah, I don't think at the time. I think maybe. I mean, you could say that. I think it all depends on your view on science fiction. I think if you're into hard sci-fi, you'd like this story. If you're not into hard sci-fi, as in the science side of things, that's what I mean by hard sci-fi. I'll explain what I mean, just in case anyone's not getting me. There's science fiction like Star Wars, which is no science whatsoever, and it just basically comes under a genre header. And then you've got hard science fiction with things like Dune and Gattaca, where there is an actual basis behind the science, and that requires explaining beyond what most readers would be able to conjure up in their schema.
So does that mean that we could technically look at Frankenstein and consider that to be hard science fiction?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because even though galvanization, which is what she mainly based her science on, was a thing at the time, it was never really proved. So you could actually argue that she was basing it on science at the time, but her explanation of the science wasn't anywhere near hard sci-fi. There was no real getting into the nitty-gritty of it. Most of the explanation of what happened as galvanization came post Frankenstein coming out with the adaptations of it. Certain adaptations went into a much deeper thing. She kind of just described it as galvanization and allowed it to kind of be what would have been in the newspapers around the time, where HG has a tendency, he was a bit of a scientist, which is why if you read The Time Machine or of Things to Come, then you can see he does things like almost predict the atomic bomb, because he predicts a bomb that constantly explodes within itself over a billion times, and that's in Shape of Things to Come. So he was really into that, and yes, he came from the elite, and he was a little bit imperialist, and he did have a certain thing about eugenics as well, as a lot of wankers from that time did. But in his writing, he always had that element of science in it, and even when we read the Open Door, that still there were elements of that where the descriptions went into that kind of idea, but because it wasn't hard science that he was describing at the time, but he still went very detailed. He's always been a very detailed writer. I think that comes from his journalism.
I mean, I suppose my criticism against this one is also that it's the same issue that I've got with Les Mis. We've got sort of like two stories that have been jammed together. You've got sort of like the story of this bloke who's wanting to sell an egg and not wanting to sell an egg, and his family are a bunch of gits and they cause problems with him. And then that suddenly abruptly stops, and we go into, he's around this bloke's flat and he's positioning himself at 137 degrees from the egg so that he can see something. And what's he seeing? He's seeing Mars. And then he dies. And it's just, that's an hour of my life. In fact, it's not just an hour of my life, because I listened to it 3 times thinking I'd missed something the first time.
Well,
so yeah,
I think there's a definite thing on taste with this one.
Yeah.
Do I think it's a work of genius? No, I don't think it's a work of genius. And I actually agree with you to a certain degree in that if it is the first piece of H.G. Wells you've ever picked up and you're not into hard sci-fi, I don't think you'd pick up another piece of H.G. Wells.
Yeah.
Because it's too niche in its approach. But if you have read War of the Worlds and go back and read this, I think you get a big kick out of it, because it's almost like, I'm thinking of this almost in the way as well of Dracula's Guest, in that it's kind of like a first chapter that didn't make the book because it doesn't quite fit. You can imagine this being in a preface to War of the Worlds, and then it being the decision to go no, because it takes away the mood and it's not like the rest of the book. It just shares ideas. And like we have with Dracula's Guest, you could see that as a preface in Dracula, but it wouldn't work. It would actually it would detract from the rest of the book.
Yeah, I think it should be there sort of like as an appendix afterwards, saying, "Oh, and yeah, if you enjoyed the story, in that case, yeah, read this."
This is how the Martians were viewing, because it never actually states how the Martians view this world with envious eyes. We get this idea of them looking through big telescopes at us because that's how Hollywood presented it. But the actual way that they actually viewed us is never really approached in the War of the Worlds. And so this little thing just sits here as a curiosity that's what hangs around. And I can understand how this story has been very influential. I really can. And I can also understand how it becomes, please excuse the pun, but it's the Easter eggs. That if anyone who writes something that is very based on, like Alan Moore wrote the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and in volume 2 of that comic book, the Martians invade.
Right.
But in that, and I didn't realize, because I actually hadn't read this story before. I will hold my hand up on that one. I never understood in that they had crystal eggs in that. And they were just there. They never even discussed them, but they were there in the background. And in my research, I actually found that is a reference to this short story. So Alan Moore and his artist, might just be his artist, it might not be Alan Moore, but they had a think that this was a prequel to, and it had a relationship with War of the Worlds. So, and I get that. I get also the whole interstellar communication devices. There's a lot there that I think is really quite exciting in ideas, in those creative ideas. I understand completely is the characters are never fully explored. You don't really get them. But Wells is quite often with that, isn't he? The unnamed narrator that goes on in this. As you know, I've been doing a lot of thought into what makes second person writing, and how I think I've identified it as being a lot more nuanced than the main consensus of what second person is. I actually think breaking the fourth wall suddenly becomes second person if it's done in a particular way, and I think he does that in this story. He doesn't do it in War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds is just a narrator that's talking about everything. Where here, he actually talks about this is where this ends, this bit. And he's kind of talking to you through it and recounting the tale, which we've seen in many things. I mean, M.R. James did it a lot, and a lot of the early Weird Tales did that. It's not me that went through this, but my friend told me this story. And this one just doesn't start with that line, but it does have those connecting bits that go on with that. So there's a lot in this, I think, that actually, if you pull it apart from a creative point of view, there are huge, huge ideas going on in this story. And it's only short, really. I mean, it's 52 minutes was the version I listened to, looking at it. So it's probably about 6,000, 7,000 word story. And there's just so much little bits going on in there. But I'll agree with you. I don't think the characters are overly memorable. Pointing out, and when I actually did the synopsis, I couldn't even remember the main character's name. And I think
you are absolutely right with what you said about the science. You can sort of like pull the science out of there, and there are so many huge ideas in there. If there's an idea huge enough to actually base War of the Worlds on in there, in that case, that's a magnificent one. The fact that you've got these technologies that are connecting, and it's almost like you've got CCTV cameras that I think perhaps that was what my issue was, that there's lots of big ideas, but it just didn't appeal to me as a narrative. It was just a case of, there's this bloke, we know that he's dead by the start of the story. You get towards the end of the story and he's very dead, and he's and he's not got it anymore. And
I'm gonna agree with you there. I think when thinking about it, and that's why I said I put that caveat in at the beginning, in that I think my love for this story is more to do with my love for War of the Worlds than it is for the story itself.
Yeah,
I was getting excited at suddenly realizing that there were these moments where they aligned, and there were these moments that, it's a bit like when you watch the nostalgia movies nowadays. If you watch like Ghostbusters Afterlife, for example, it's not a particularly brilliant film, but it's dragged along because you sit there going, oh my god, that's like that bit, and oh my god, they pulled that from the other one. So you get these moments of nostalgia and these moments of sort of like retro cognitive stuff where you go, that's what I'm looking at there. And I think that's where I'm coming from, I think, more than anything else on this one. It's got brilliant, big, beautiful ideas. And then the fact that it's almost like H.G. Wells did write something else at the time of War of the Worlds that explained part of it. And it suddenly becomes that in my head. And it's like, I have no evidence other than my own thoughts on this. I'm sure if I dove deep into it, somebody's written an article somewhere or an essay somewhere that really connects them even more. But I think that's where I have red weed coloured glasses on this one.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice, like that.
You know, where you're coming from it, from being someone who loves plot and genre. And so, you know, see, and character, because you know, the three things that have to combine.
Yeah.
To make that.
It didn't have it for me. And yeah, but yeah, that's just me. Do you want to know what I've picked for us for next week?
Go on. Well, let's just do a quick conclusion. So the conclusion is I liked it, but I'm a bit biased, and Ash didn't like it so much for his own biased reasons.
Yes.
So we'll go with that one, and I quite like it when we differ on that one. But I am thinking about that story in a completely different way as well, because of what you've said there. Right, let me find a page. What are we reading next week?
The Premature Burial.
Oh my goodness. Oh, I don't like that already. Not as in I don't like the story. I'm pretty certain, you know, there's a good amount of writing on this, but the concept here already is frightening me.
And yeah, it's one of my favourite authors, Edgar Allan Poe.
There we go. So, two things about this are already frightening me. The title, A Premature Burial, and Edgar Allan Poe. I know these two things are going to combine. Like I said to you, I was very unfair on Edgar Allan Poe when I realized, but then I realized why I was unfair on Edgar Allan Poe, and it had nothing to do with him. So going back and reinvestigating it. Thank you very much. We'll definitely have a look at that one. Great. Well, that was great. I really enjoyed that tonight.
So did I. Yeah. It's been too long. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. It's end of year stuff for me. Not financial.
Same
University.
Same here, yeah. There's been lots of things getting in the way, but yeah, it's been good to actually chat about one this evening.
Absolutely. Well, we'll come back to it soon. So, Edgar Allan Poe, Premature Burial, and do read some more H.G. Wells, not just this one. He has written a lot of really, really good stuff. There are other rubbish bits as well. He has other rubbish, but do read the good stuff. All right. See you later, Ash.
See you later, mate. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.